So, Karen, you were the first elected mayor of Tacoma, woman mayor of Tacoma. And you've got, looking at the rest of your history here, it's rich enough for several lifetimes. You've worked as an assistant professor, a school administrator, a PTA mom, deputy chief for the state insurance commissioner. You've been a member of the Tacoma City Council. And, it goes on and on and on. Check your programs. It's all in there. But from an early age, Karen, you say that you learned you were expected to advocate for those less fortunate than yourself. And you're a fifth-generation Tacoman, and that's not a lot of people can claim that deep of a legacy here in Tacoma. So what role did your family story play in the work you've done throughout your career?
The only reason I've done this work is because of my family legacy. Back in 1848, a young woman with her husband and 4 children got on a naval ship called the USS Massachusetts. And they were my great-great-grandparents. My great-great-grandfather was a corporal in the United States Army, and they sailed to Puget Sound. They were ordered by the President of the United States to establish an American presence north of the Columbia River. That makes me among the early descendant of the earliest white American pioneers, not only in Pierce County, but here in the state of Washington. And they brought with them an attitude of courage, integrity, and kindness. There have been many stories written about both Christopher Mann and Elizabeth Mann, early days. Christopher in particular, about the courage. And the one thing we were brought up in our family is make it better and do the right thing. Christopher refused to preside over Chief Leshai's trial. And I think we all know the story of Chief Leshai, which was a very courageous move. It flew right in the face of the Army. He was out of the Army at that time. And someone said to me, it must have been pretty important because he was the only one that wasn't arrested for doing that and not coming in. Taught us respect from early days. All of my family were here in Tacoma and Pierce County before 1890. I'm of Scandinavian descent, which makes it hard for me today to talk about myself. I'm really good when I have to go talk about Tacoma Public Schools and the city of Tacoma. But for me personally, I'm more nervous about doing this than I was when I addressed 15,000 mayors from around the world as a keynote speaker back in 1992, because it's hard for me to talk about. It's easy for me to talk about the people who influenced our lives. My great-great-grandmother, other great-grandmother who came from Norway, witnessed the Chinese expulsion, and made it very clear to all of us in our family, unto whom much is given, much is expected. And she lived to 98. All 3 of my great-grandmothers did. I was very fortunate, to 97, 98, and 100. You have a job and you do it. And we walked that proverb in our family of under whom much is expected, of whom much is given, much is expected. And I knew that. And I saw that modeled by also my grandfathers and great-grandfathers who were involved in the early labor movements, making life better for other people. My dad was the first generation who went to college in 1926. He was a son of a landscape gardener who would now probably call an estate manager for the Murray Estate on Gravelly Lake Drive. And education played a big role. My mother, her dad was a sawmill worker. My grandmother, on the other hand, was the first woman bank teller in Pierce County. So I grew up with strong women, and I grew up knowing that I had a role to play in what was going to happen in Tacoma, because everybody had the basic values of our family are courage, integrity, and kindness. I found out years later when we were doing the Puyallup land claim settlement about my grandfather. Someone asked me, are you Charles Risfit's granddaughter? And I said, yes, I am. She said he arranged for all of the patients at the old Cushman Indian Hospital to always have fresh flowers in their rooms, and none of us have ever forgotten that kindness. And at the same time, my mother was very outspoken. I'm surprised. That was the thing about women in our family. The family mantra of the women, if my dad and my uncles were still alive, was don't tell us what to do. And I'm not kidding. There were strong Norwegian women supported by strong Norwegian men who said, okay. And it was probably kept peace in the family. My grandfather would say to my grandma, now calm down, Mary. So we all learned to speak out and to do what was right, whether that was in civil rights. My mother, I didn't know until years later because I was small. There was a movement in Washington State to make people, nationally, the McCarthy time, to make people sign oaths of loyalty to the United States government. And Mrs. Shudikoff, who was a counselor in Tacoma Public Schools on the principles of freedom of speech and so on, refused to do that. And they were going to run her out of town, and she happened to be at our school where I attended at that time as a first grader. And my mother spoke out very loud and clear about what the basic principles of America was about, and that wasn't it. And years later, it had to help Mrs. Shudikoff keep her job. So I just grew up, and I just grew up watching our family take in kids who needed homes and not necessarily through any formal process and helping them through. In my own career, I faced many challenges because I was not afraid. As one of my classmates said, we never knew you to be afraid. I decided, what am I going to do? So I went to college, went to University of Puget Sound and Washington State University, and began to realize I was the only woman in my classes. Nobody majored in economics. And I thought, this had some unique challenges in itself. And I remember my dad telling me when I was a little girl, do not anyone ever tell you cannot do anything because you are a girl. You may have to work harder, but don't let them tell you that. So I got out of when I was in graduate school, I became the first woman TA in the economics or the political science department. I had double major. And that was difficult because I didn't get the teaching assignments till I finally went and complained to the department chair, who was unaware of that, so I did. When I came out, I went and worked at University of Puget Sound, very quickly got involved with a bunch of other young people in the early civil rights movement, and became friends with a person who to this day is one of the most important people in my life, and that's Harold Moss. You can applaud, he's an amazing man. And he told me, you're not scared to do it, get out there, and I did. And then I had an opportunity to go to work in the governor's office, which I was the first female hired. And I found out what it was like to get discriminated against. I was in that budget office, the only woman, and I did very well. Within 6 months I was in management, but I found out I got paid less than anyone else in the same comparable job. And I went and talked to, I happened to know the Speaker of the House. He was from Pierce County, and he was part of the old group here in Tacoma and Pierce County. And he went to Governor Evans, which scared me because I'd just gotten appointed to this job. And the governor called me over and he said, is this true you're not getting paid? I said, no, I'm not. He said, yes, you are as of now. And he said, and by the way, tell Miller, that was the head of the budget office, we're going to do a comparable worth study and find out how much of this is going on. And then I got the opportunity to get into politics. I swore I never would. And in the meantime, I married the most amazing person in the world who supported me in everything I did, and still does. Marvin Vialle, 47 years, my husband. And we raised 3 sons. And that was an experience. That's why my hair is this color. So, and we now have grandchildren. But one of Bill Barsma called me and said, you need to run for city council. And this was like on a Wednesday, and your filing was on a Friday. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And he said, oh, yes, you are. And I called my mother, and I said, should I do this? She said, oh, yes, you do. So I got elected and and 2 years later, I became the first female mayor in Tacoma. That was not easy. It was not easy. Women were not supposed to be in those jobs, and if we were, we weren't supposed to be strong. Well, I thought, you know what, I'm here for a reason, and that's to get a job done and not worry about getting reelected or anything else. And in 1990, the city needed moving forward. We're sitting in one of the buildings that I helped make happen during that time, along with Union Station and things like that. But when the courage and the integrity came, and we also did some pretty significant things in diversifying our workforce. We did some things, and one of the things that I point to, and she's out in the audience, who's become a very successful person in this community, is I took a young law school graduate and appointed her to the chair of the first hate crimes commission in the U.S., and that's State Rep Lori Jenkins. So we did some things, and believe me, I was scared a few times, and contrary to what people thought. And I look back on those basic values: do what's right. If it's the right thing, you do it. And the other piece of advice my dad gave me is don't know what you don't know. and don't get into what you don't know because you'll make a mess. And I did, and that was true, and I've lived by that. And I knew that one thing that came up probably was going to cost me getting reelected, but it was worth it. Burlington Northern wanted to sell us 24 acres on the Theophos Waterway for $6.8 million. And I actually played golf one day, and I was up on Brookdale Golf Course, which is the family farm. And there's a cemetery up there where my great-great-grandma, who got on that boat and sailed, and I thought, man, if Grandma Lizzie could do that, I can do this. And it took a while, but we bought it. Polling numbers were horrible. And I thought, you know what, 25 years from now, people are going to appreciate that. And that $6.8 million has generated $500 million in investment. And I don't think anybody would say it was not a good investment now. But there were times when you were a female of my age that you were alone at the top. And didn't have anybody. Someone said to me, Mayor Strickland, who I have great respect for, and she calls me Mommy, and she said, who did you talk to? And Senator Franklin will know this because I know she did too. And Rosa's an amazing woman. I talked to Senator Lorraine Wojon, who is an island unto herself, and she just told me, hang in there and be tough. And she was right. So anyway, when all was said and done, I didn't get reelected, and that FOSS thing was probably the primary reason, but I would do it again. And then, I kept thinking, I had a personal experience that was pretty frightening. In 1998, I was diagnosed with endometrial cancer, and I did not know where that was going to go. And fortunately, I was under the care of the late Dr. Gordon Klatt, and I came through that without 18 years later, I'm here. But in the meantime, I had a very moving experience with someone named Virginia Taylor, and many of you may remember Virginia in our community. We had the same kind of cancer. Yes, thank you. Judy does, I know. And this is a story that Thomas Dixon and I went to see Virginia, and I said, you know what, I do not know why I'm surviving and you're not. And she said, I'll tell you why. God's done with me and he's not done with you. And she said, figure it out. Well, I think I figured it out. I got myself elected to the school board, and it's the most wonderful thing I think I've ever done in my life in terms of being able to help kids and build the future. And that's what this is all about. And I guess if I could share 3 things with you. Don't be afraid. Courage is important, but don't be foolish. Know what it means. The other thing is to care about people. And the greatest thing in this world I've learned is giving back. And I know I grew up in a middle class or upper middle class, as my brother said, family, but being Norwegians, we didn't know that until after they were gone. That's no joke for those of you who know Scandinavian values, that much is required of us and should be required of us. And I looked upon that not as a burden, as my brother said, many people in our family did, but as an opportunity that as Kevin Aketa, who's the principal at Stadium High School, had a very serious medical issue last spring, and he's fine now. But he said in our lives, there are 2 things. We're born, and I was born in 1943, and on that tombstone there's a dash to when the day that God takes us home. And what's important is what we do with that dash. And I want to leave you with that because Soldier and I are sitting here, and we said we're about half of that 300 years, that we're both still working on our dash. And I want you to remember that nobody does this job alone, and that's what I learned. During those times, I had some pretty powerful men, one named Daniel Jackson Evans, who helped mentor me and get me through that, and another one named Wallace G. Miller. And reach out. Because the most important thing that we do on this earth is build a better future for our kids. And thank you, and God bless you for giving me this opportunity.